Well, good afternoon. It's my pleasure to be able to introduce to you my boss and friend, Stephen Black. I don't think I'd be exaggerating to say that I really think Stephen is the most creative public servant we have in Alabama in terms of connecting people and resources to work toward large-scale solutions to some of our state's most pressing problems. Stephen, as you may know, is the grandson of U.S. Supreme Court Justice Hugo Black. Although he grew up in Albuquerque, New Mexico, he has strong family ties to our state and spent the summers of his youth visiting here. He graduated magna cum laude from the University of Pennsylvania in 1993 and graduated from Yale Law School in 1997. Following law school, he moved to Birmingham and began practicing law with Maynard Cooper and Gale. After 3 years with the firm, he was called to public service, serving for a brief time as an assistant to the governor, focusing on policy and economic development projects. Encouraged by the enthusiasm of hundreds of students he encountered when speaking across the state in that capacity, he turned his focus to founding and leading an organization called Impact Alabama, a student service initiative. Impact is a nationally unique nonprofit that has provided more than 3,000 college students the opportunity to participate in structured service projects designed to promote learning and leadership development. Since Impact Alabama's inception in 2004, these students have screened over 110,000 children for vision problems, prepared tax returns for more than 10,000 working families, saving them more than $3 million in commercial preparation fees, provided a debate team program for 32 gifted students from Birmingham's public high schools, resulting in over $2.5 million in college scholarships, and provided an advanced placement academic institute for more than 90 high school students in Birmingham and Huntsville. In addition to his extensive work as president of Impact, Stephen directs the Center for Ethics and Social Responsibility at the University of Alabama, where he also serves as a senior lecturer in communicative ethics. It's an honor to get to go into work every day and work with Stephen. Alabama can only get better as Stephen works to solve some of its problems. So please help me, join me in welcoming Stephen Black today.
Thank you, Sarah Louise, and thanks for the invitation. And I don't know, when you hear her read all that out, I don't know if those numbers just start melding together. I couldn't be any more proud of our staff. And sometimes I think there's a bias in terms of thinking about what a leader looks like. And there have been a lot of great social psychology studies about how there's a bias toward elected leaders with broad shoulders and they're tall. And I think there are 2 CEOs of Fortune 500 companies who are under 5'8", who are under average height. And I don't know, because I've known her now for 6 years, I don't know if you think, when you look at Sarah Louise, that's probably the finest, most effective leader in the city. But I'm telling you factually, she is. This is about 6 years past my ability to do 10% of the work of Impact. And it almost all is based on the ability and the work ethic and really just the brilliance of Sarah Louise. And I feel like us sponsoring her membership here was our way of saying how much we believe in the idea of this Rotaract. And I think there's no greater gift that Impact can give you all than having Sarah Louise as a member here. And please don't ask her to be on any more committees, though. She's got enough. This is what I want to say. I would love to just stand here and tell you more about each initiative, but I think I want to do this because it applies more broadly than just to our work. And I would suggest what I'm going to say applies to everything any of us are passionate about and any of us care about. And I would like to put it in terms of what I think is the biggest challenge facing our ability to have an ethical, engaged community to live in over the next 30 years. I think far more important a consideration for whether or not we're successful as a region than another recession, God forbid, another banking crisis, which would be terrible, some sort of terrorist threat, unknown or known, or an incredibly complicated, dangerous world economy that has a great impact, obviously, on our ability to be progressive and successful in the future. But at a more fundamental level, this is what I would suggest to you is the biggest challenge facing all of us by far. And to be honest, this is part of the answer. When I say this, I mean membership in organizations like this. Because the challenge, the way I would argue to you all, is a 40-year continuing decline in civic engagement, a deterioration of civic connectedness across class, across race, across age until 10 years ago, and across all regions of the country. Rotary, Kiwanis, Lions Clubs, just those three. Most college students would think of those three organizations as sort of stale, kind of older white men, some cool scholarships if you're lucky. Just those three organizations alone have contributed billions of dollars, had a transformative effect on millions of people, not even just in the country, worldwide. And at this point in their evolution, most Americans think of them as a stale, declining lunch club. And statistically speaking, they're a declining lunch club. PTA, had an incredible, rich history of parents and families engaging in schools and helping improve them. 4-H, especially in more rural areas, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, Boys and Girls Clubs of America, the JCs, Masons, list you 100 that has come to encompass what it means to be an engaged American. There aren't a lot of Americans who decide to make a difference and alone walk up to a middle school and knock on the door and say, "Can I help out?" There aren't a lot of Americans alone who decide to try to affect health care reform who alone walk to Congress and start knocking on doors. We tend to historically find ourselves, when we make the biggest difference, doing it as members of an association, as a group, as a club, as a movement, whether it's on internet or real. And historically, in the last 40 years, every organization I just named to you has dramatically declined in relation to the population. And you think through, well, are we just bad Americans? Are we just not good at citizenship anymore? And it's pretty easy to answer that with a no, and to realize that for most Americans, a lack of civic engagement is a direct result of less time available to engage civically. Mainly, to put it pointedly, it's a story of women in America. In the late 60s and early 70s, women come pouring into the workforce by the tens of millions, to the point you're at by the early 80s, following through to today, which is every able-bodied adult in the majority of households in Alabama and the rest of the country are working every hour they can find. And it wasn't a decision on behalf of women to be able to get luxury goods or a vacation home. It was a decision for the vast majority of women to help their family barely hang on. For a large majority of Alabama families, living paycheck to paycheck, with more credit card debt than any time in the past, less savings for families than any time in the past, requiring everyone to work as many hours as they can to live in certain categories at a standard of living lower than our grandfathers, who often did it on one income, usually without a college degree. Clearly no longer that is the case. No brilliant insight to share with you. But I think it requires an extra new level of thoughtfulness for the civic consequences of the world and the economy we live in. Especially when you couple the second trend of the last 40 years. It's not just the economy that makes people less likely to participate in an involvement in their schools. It's also a demographic shift, i.e. Shelby County, the push from Mobile into Baldwin County, the push west out of Huntsville into Madison, some push toward Fultondale, into the suburbs. 15 years ago now being an unbelievably important indicator for any of us who care about thoughtful engagement. 15 years ago was the first point in our country's history at which a majority of us as Americans now live in the suburbs. And with that comes, back to time, even less time to engage civically, because what happens to Americans as more and more of us continue to suburbanize? Other than working more hours on average than any decade in the past, what else are we now doing more than we've ever done in the past? Driving. The average commute continues to go up. There were articles written 10 years ago about Atlanta titled and sort of talked about as the revolt of the commuter, a portrait of new urban lofts, which are great stories, great for our city. It's been a really healthy development in Birmingham, as it has been in other cities. Statistically speaking, it's an anomaly. We're not returning to center living. As Americans, the majority of us are pushing further out into more suburbs, causing more of us to spend even more time in the car, having less time, and this is the main argument, having less time to engage in personal relationships with people unlike ourselves, aimed at purposes and goals beyond our own family's self-interest. That's what's dramatically shrunk. Now, I would suggest the poisonousness of that phenomenon is this. Some of us in this room are Republican, some are Democrat, maybe some Green Party. Raise your hand. Be proud. No Green. Maybe some Tea Partiers. We won't have a debate now. regardless of ideology, I would argue to you all that at the heart of thoughtful public action, at the core of being good, this comes down to the level of this club. With the resources and time and talent you all have, what are the best decisions to make to address needs in the community? That's not an easy answer. I mean, you all thoughtfully continue to evolve in thinking, well, what should next step be? Well, how do you know when more and more of us with college educations don't know families with children who are attending schools 15 minutes away from a suburban school where their 10th graders are reading 3 grade levels below the children in the suburbs? Where you're in a state where the vast majority of children don't see pediatricians and parents go to sleep at night praying their child doesn't get sick, because we do have a universal health care system. We have a series of public emergency rooms that are open 24 hours, and you take your child in with an asthma attack at age 8, and all of us as taxpayers pay 5 times what it would have cost if the child had primary care at age 2. But it's harder and harder for us as college-educated, busy, working Americans to engage thoughtfully in solving those problems when the disconnect continues to grow. In other words, as I suggest to college students, conservatively, 20% of the adult population in Alabama is functionally illiterate. The Literacy Council will tell you it's 25. Conservatively, it's 20%. And I say that, and I see college students' eyes, and I know some of them are thinking, there's a lot of lazy people around. And I'll tell you statistically, that's not true. That the vast majority of them have been working every day they can since they were 15. There's a lot of complex, nuanced, failing reasons that go into growing into adulthood in a state in our country literally without the ability to reason. Let's be clear, 20%, I don't mean that can't read Beowulf. I mean 20% that can't understand the directions of the Department of Motor Vehicles. You think of the consequences of that, please think generationally. Do you think the likelihood is of a second grader to be reading at grade level if they're being raised by an adult in the household who's functionally illiterate? 5% of them. What percentage of those second graders are reading at grade level by the time they're seniors in high school? Less than 10%. Almost a reality locked into stone by the age of 6. And the more and more of us suburbanize, the more and more of us have homogenized relationships. Because statistically, that's what we find in the suburbs. As you head out toward Montgomery, you'll see signs. New homes, Oak Grove housing development, starting in the low 300s. That may be beyond your reach. Just drive 15 more minutes, you'll see another sign. New homes, exit here. Poplar Estates, homes starting in the low 200s. Still can't quite afford that? Just get to Alabaster, or going to Tuscaloosa, get to the Academy exit. I saw the sign yesterday. New homes starting in the low 100s. Oak Hill. Do you all ever notice that new housing subdivisions are usually named after the trees they killed to build them? I feel like that's unfair and there should be a rule against that. And you see a demographic track laid out now more dramatically with this census than even 10 years ago, where Americans have more and more in the last generation segmented themselves across the interstate systems, the suburbs of America, by $30,000 to $40,000 a year increments. Spending more and more time at work, more and more time in the car, and less time in relationships with people making different amounts of money, different worldviews, different experiences, different backgrounds. The reason this seems so important to me, and I argue it's important to all of us, is at the heart of thoughtful public action is compassion. And I don't mean a soundbite version. And I don't mean some liberal, feel-good, flippant term. I mean the ability that you develop as a human being to walk in someone else's shoes. The ability you develop, or you don't, to see through someone else's eyes. The ability that you either develop or not to feel a pain in your gut or in your heart, thinking about what it would be like to be a family, working every hour you can find, trying to play by the rules.